We begin the conversation in Nigeria, where the Nigeria Labour Congress has accused the Minister of Labour and Employment, Simon Lalong, of obstructing the implementation of a recent agreement with the federal government. The NLC alleges that the minister is taking sides in the crisis with the National Union of Road Transport Workers, NURTW, supporting an illegal faction and encouraging them to hold their own delegates conference. This interference is seen as a violation of international labour conventions and an attempt to undermine the Labour government agreement. Now, joining me this evening for this all-important discussion is Segun, Chairman, Accountability, Candour and Transparency Networks for Political Discussions in Nigeria. He joins me live in our studio in Lagos. We also have Barrister Kingsley, Chime, legal practitioner. A warm welcome to you, gentlemen, and thanks for joining me on the conversation.
A pleasure.
Now,
Thank you so much, Gbenga.
It's a pleasure to have you both on the program. Now, I'd like to begin with Mr. Sopitan in the studio. To begin with, could you provide some historical context on the relationship between the Nigeria Labour Congress and the Ministry of Labour and Employment, because they seem to be the government ministry which they interface with most frequently? How have past interactions influenced the current accusations, and what's the level of trust between these two bodies?
Well, look, historically, the Nigeria Labour Congress, the Trade Union Congress, and other unions, maybe even civil society groups, have had a bit of a cat and mouse relationship with governments of the day. It's not just about the government in power today. There has been a huge trust deficit between Labour and the government, usually not unrelated with the fact that government tends not to deal or appear to tend not to deal with good faith when it's relating with both Labour and the Nigerian people. A lot of utterances and pronouncements, promises made, just end up not being fulfilled. Whether you talk about minimum wage or other conditions of service across the different tiers of government work unions. So this is not new, and one would hope that this new Labour minister would toe a different path. You will remember in the days of the former minister, the man from Anambra, I forget his name now, former governor Ngige. Thank you, Chris yes. Ngige. It was very fractious. There were plenty of controversies, things that I will tend to regard as reckless statements and pronouncements
across all unions. I mean, there was a time
he
said
the doctors,
doctors should go
absolutely. So he said all sorts of strange things, and so this is not new. This predates even Ngige. So what we're seeing today is just in keeping with the tradition of the cat and mouse relationship between these two parties, and we hope that things will change in the coming days, but it's very doubtful.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sopitan. Now, Barrister Chime, the Nigeria Labour Congress has accused the Minister of Labour and Employment, Simon Lalong, of attempting to scuttle the implementation of a recent agreement. I mean, this agreement, I'm sure the pen, the ink on which this agreement was written on has not even dried. Can you explain the key elements of this agreement and why it's crucial for both the labour movement and the government to, keep their own sides of the bargain? And is there any reason why the government should be trying to act out of that agreement?
For having me once again. Like I always say that the issue of Labour and the federal government, just as your guest in the studio has rightly pointed out, there has always been a cat and mouse relationship over the years, and that also trickles down to the seriousness of the government in ensuring that citizens' welfare is made a priority. Of course, a few weeks ago, on the eve of the day the labor unions intended to commence strike, the strike action was abruptly suspended following what they agreed, the memorandum of understanding that was signed by both parties. And by my own understanding, the memorandum of understanding was made to be filed in court officially or formally, that adopted as terms of settlement. And in terms of settlement, in my own understanding, is a judgment of the court which binds both parties involved. So the issue of accusing the labor minister of trying to scuttle the arrangement or understanding reached is actually trying to, blame to leave out the cat and start blaming the hawk for carrying the chicks. I think the blame should be on the government. Of course, the Minister of Labor is representing the government. So he cannot be acting on his own accord. It must flow from whatever directive he must have received from the government. So on 2 weeks ago, federal government, as part of immediate step towards ensuring that industrial action did not proceed, made out some proposals and some understanding, one of which was to have a 35,000, what they call wage award, and some other incentive, and we have 100 billion CNG buses that will be introduced. There are tax incentives. There are a lot of understanding that we are reached. But like I always say that the issue of government and labor, for me has become an unholy alliance, because otherwise on 29th May, when President Tinubu took over the mantle of leadership, he made a public pronouncement which resulted into immediate removal of fuel subsidy. And since then, up until now, things has never been the same. And efforts being made by the national body of labor unions towards drawing the attention of government to suffering this as a method to citizens seem not to have yielded any results. And Nigerians as a whole are also losing faith in the labor unions, in their fight for the generality of Nigerians.
Yeah, they seem to be all back and no bite. The labor union threatens, and at the 11th hour, they call off the strike.
They are coming to let people talk. And I think they're also having some holy alliance with the government, which will always scuttle whatever move they intend to take at every minute of the day. So I don't even see any magic happening after the expiration of the period of the suspension, especially given the fact that the government has not deemed it fit to live up to their own expectation. Judgment of the court, and by that terms of settlement, ought to be obeyed. There is no question of, there's no liberty on any party to refrain from complying with the terms of that judgment. So when you hear people say that a minister is trying to scuttle the arrangement, these are contemptuous issues. These are legal issues. These are things that people, serious-minded society, you frown at. If a government as an institution will begin to, leapfrog on issues like this, what do you now expect the citizens to do?
Exactly.
So it must lead by example. If you have made an undertaking, if you have reached an agreement, that agreement must be complied. And for whatever reason you cannot comply with it, that also should be made expressly and clearly. Not for a body, national body of association of labor to begin to accuse one man. As far as I'm concerned, labor minister has nothing to do with this. It has to do with the government. We have to
Thank you very much, Barrister Chime. Mr. Sopitan, when you started, you used the word trust deficit between the government and the people, and we've seen this play out. It's not even 2 weeks since that agreement was signed, and we're seeing signs that it might not be obeyed. I know you're not a soothsayer, but what reasons could you give the federal government for doing this? I mean, the agreement wasn't signed under duress, and like Barrister Chime said, if you reach an agreement, the gentlemanly thing is to follow through the agreement. And also, second part of my question, where did this crisis in the National Union of Road Transport Workers come from? And what are the underlying factors leading to such a significant dispute within the union? And how is it connected to the Labour Party's, the Nigerian Labour Congress's goal to get the federal government to implement this side of the deal?
Well, to the first part of your question, I honestly will struggle to find a reason adduce a reason as to why the government will.
Or are we making a mountain out of a
No, we're not. There are serious issues here. First of all, you find that the key bone of contention that the NLC is talking about now has to do with the NURTW issue and nothing else. In fact, to be fair to the government, for the sake of balance, as public commentators, we have to say that one of the things that the MOU did speak about was the conditional cash transfer scheme, the social investment program. They promised that before the end of October they would start the 25,000 distribution of 25,000 naira to 15 million households. It's a part of the MOU, and we saw all of the public razzmatazz and the photo ops with a check of 25,000 naira being presented to a couple of people. Obviously symbolic gestures. So clearly, the government has implemented some part of that agreement. Other parts of the agreement would take time to implement. For example, deployment of the CNG kits, making provision for CNG buses to be distributed across the country. That would take time maybe some time to implement. So we have to hope that the government is working on that, even though I don't have any faith in that particular angle or aspect of that agreement. So yes, the government is doing some, but on the NURTW issue, I think we have to keep our wits about us and pay very close attention to this drama that is playing out, because I suspect that it may very well speak to the very heart of the nature of governance that we will be getting in the next 4 years. So when you speak about, to go to the second part of your question, what's the background, to all of this, you find that there is a tussle between the legitimately elected leadership of the NURTW, as headed by Aborowa, and the Lagos State Parks and Gardens Commission. And you find that very curious. And if you then dig deeper into that, you find a very notorious name at the back of that. The very well-known, let me just use his nickname, MC Oluomo. That's the name that everybody knows him as. So in the middle of all of this, it appears as though there is some sort of subtle tussle for power and control at the political level, knowing fully well that for politicians, the NURTW is a key tool to pursue your political objectives, especially when elections are approaching. So it looks as if all of this may have very strong political undertones, but also may have implications in terms of governance, because you do not want a situation where the structures, in quotes, and I use that word, not particularly positively, that exists or existed in Lagos is being transferred or transplanted to Abuja. It would appear as though this may very well be what we're seeing playing out. And this is the Nigerian Labour Congress and the Labour Union as a whole trying to resist such an effort on the part of the federal government. I hope I'm wrong, but it does look, if you look at the background information, that this may be what is playing out. This may just simply be a power grab and control, a takeover of the structures of the NURTW by the government of the day. If that is the case, then I think the resistance from the NLC must be supported. We do not want to see a situation where what we have been experiencing in Lagos, for a while now, is replicated at the national level. That will not augur well for the safety and the peaceful running of society in Nigeria. So we will continue to observe this, but I would say that the NLC and the TUC's effort to resist this must be supported. The government promised that leadership tussle would have been resolved by the 13th of October. Today is the 20th. It still hasn't been resolved. And in fact, the reason that the NLC is now speaking is that it appears as though the minister is wading into this controversy and trying to create a parallel meeting where something funny might be foisted on the NURTW. And I think that's why the NLC is speaking out now. And, we must encourage and support their outcry.
Thank you, Mr. Sopitan. Now, Barrister Chime, the NLC, still talking about the NLC and this NURTW situation. The NLC suggests that the government is supporting an illegal faction of the NURTW. What do you make of this? And is it a divide and conquer type of strategy. What examples or evidence can the government or is the NLC given to support this assertion?
Gbenga, I think you have made the point very clear. You have answered the question, and I think Mr. Segun on the studio has also spoken eloquently on what he feels and what I also feel is the real issue, that crisis. I'm not privy to information leading to the crisis, but one would assume that ordinarily government shouldn't have any hand or anybody to side in this type of crisis. But you will see that the origin of this crisis may be politically motivated, just like Mr. Segun said. I only see the hand of Esau in the body of Jacob. And the hand of Esau here is the government, while the Jacob here is the people that are fighting themselves. So it has a political undertone, no doubt. And I believe that government to begin to extricate itself from, association politics and focus more on governance of Nigerians.
Now, still staying with you, Barrister Chime, oftentimes we see governments enter MOUs with the Nigeria Labour Congress and everything is not, is there a way that legally you could make this agreements binding so that, if one party desists from following through the agreement, it can end up in court? Because oftentimes when the Nigeria Labour Congress threatens strike, the government goes to court and say, use the National Industrial Court, for example, and say, stop them from going on this strike and have all sorts of injunctions to prevent NLC from going to strike. But no one holds them accountable for failing in their own side of the agreement.
Well, honestly, bindingness of every agreement, especially agreements that were executed in the presence of the court, that ultimately became judgment of the court, is not negotiable in theory. That is how it's supposed to be. But in practice, or in our own society, it may not really be the same. All of us are alive in this country, seeing court orders being flouted by government, because the responsibility of enforcement of these laws also lies in the states, the government. So when the responsibility is on the party upon whom a judgment is to be enforced against, what do you make of that? So over the years and over time, we've seen circumstances where judgments were given against the government or labor unions. This starts today, where the fight between labor unions and government is as old as the country itself. So we have seen it countless times where they reach an understanding to make a judgment of the court, which ordinarily should be binding on both parties. But more often than not, government will be the one to be breaching those agreements because they appear to be the stronger party. And the court system also appears to be helpless in circumstances like this. But in the interest of peace, in the interest of justice, in the interest of administration of justice, it's expected that every undertakings, agreement, or judgment made or entered into between parties, and which ultimately became judgment of the court, ought to be obeyed by all the parties. It is not subject to argument. It is not subject to further negotiation. Except the party waives such right, it is binding on both parties. So, but of course, you see that it doesn't really work that way. And we have also seen circumstances where labor threatens to go on strike. The federal government will quickly rush to court with ex parte order or interim order, restraining the association, the union from embarking on such strike. And you see, they come up threatening the union and informing them of the need for them to comply with the order of the court. And being a superior party in quotes, labor may not really have the wherewithal to begin to resist such order because the person that owes or that holds the responsibility of executing that judgment is the government. So they can, do anything humanly possible to ensure that you comply, especially when it's favorable to them. But that shouldn't be the case. Judgment, of course, agreements reached by parties must not only be seen to have complied with, but parties must make it a duty that judgments are respected.
Thank you very much, Barrister Chime. Now, Mr. Sopitan, in your analysis, what could be the long-term consequences if the government continues to involve itself in labor union matters, particularly in the context of the NURTW crisis, and if it doesn't also live up to its MOU agreements and fulfill its own part of the deal? Do you think, because the NLC also seem to be losing a lot of reputation, because, you know, the threatened strikes, and at the end of the day, they call it off at the 11th hour. Do you think the government will call their bluff in the future and say, you know what, they will not? We have our way of talking to them.
I mean, look, the NLC hasn't covered itself in glory with the handling of this entire issue right from May 29th, when the president declared that subsidy was gone. A more vibrant, more alert and aware NLC
and responsive.
And a responsive NLC would have reacted immediately that very day, or at worst the following day, with a warning and a cry for resistance, you know, to that policy. But the NLC waited a bit too long, and every single interaction that the NLC has had with the government since then has shown them as being lacking in resolve. In particular, you know, there's this sense of a lack of strength of character and resolve in the leadership of the NLC. I'm sorry to say. So the NLC hasn't done particularly well in the area of providing resistance, you know, to the actions of the government on behalf of the people of Nigeria. So that's on the one hand. But on the other hand, you know, the president of Nigeria promised in his May 29th inauguration speech that he was going to be a law and order president that would respect the rule of law. It was a promise and a commitment to the people of Nigeria. The actions of the president since then has been anything but that. And this is just another example. And, you know, we are saying that the people of Nigeria currently has a very huge trust deficit with the government, and this is not being made any better with the actions of the government so far. You will recall there's several appointments, you know, there's a space of appointments going on, and there's a clear tendency to simply ignore the provisions of the enabling laws governing those agencies. You know, the EFCC is one example, appointment of a fresh graduate that just served last year, you know, into FEMA, the appointment of a serving youth corper to become a minister, very clearly against the provisions of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. You know, so now going on ahead to ignore the agreements that have been filed as a judgment, as an agreement. What's the legal terminology? My colleague on air today is a lawyer. You know, the judgment agreement, you know, is legally binding. It's as good as the judgment of a court of law. You know, so for the president or the government to then, you know, ignore this, it's very dangerous.
To it.
It's a very dangerous precedent that we're setting. Of course, the government of, you know, the former president, Muhammad Buhari, has already set a tone towards that, choosing which judgments to obey, you know, and which ones not to obey as is convenient for them, cherry picking as the lawyers will call it. But it's not a trend that we should see continued, especially by a president that has declared publicly that he would respect the rule of law and he will be a president of law and order. He has to correct this impression, obey this MOU that has been filed as a court judgment to the letter in every regard of it, you know, across board. And that's what we expect to see. If we don't see that, then the legitimacy issue that the president currently faces will continue and perhaps would only get worse.
Thank you, Mr. Sopitan. Now, Barrister Chime, as we wrap up this conversation, in your expert opinion, what should be the federal government's role in mediating and resolving this labor dispute, and what broader implications might the resolution have on Nigeria's political landscape and labor relations?
The dispute is between the government and the labor. So the responsibility of resolving it it falls on both parties, especially the government, to ensure that it complies with whatever obligations or agreement it has reached with the labor union. And more importantly, to ensure that Nigerians, who are people suffering from the outcome of fuel subsidy removal, are not made the scapegoats, to have the fear of God and also ensure that citizens, sufferings are ameliorated towards ensuring we have this seamless trajectory into what the subsidy removal. But I think, in my view, that subsidy, like I said the last time I was on this station, the issue of subsidy in Nigeria has always been a scam. So I think I was of the view that 29th May subsidy removal was not going to be the end of it. We are witnesses, we are seeing what is happening in several filling stations in Nigeria. It appears that the deregulation or purported deregulation was a fraud.
Thank you very much, distinguished guest Segun Sopitan, political analyst, chairman, Accountability, Candour and Transparency Network for political discussions, and also Barrister Kingsley Chime. It was a pleasure having you both join me on the program. I appreciate your time and your insight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.